Everyone knows Satisfaction, Paint It Black, Start Me Up. But the Rolling Stones spent 6 decades making music, and the hits are only a fraction of what's in there. Here are 15 weird Rolling Stones songs you probably didn't know. Number 15. Sing This All Together. The Rolling Stones spent most of 1967 watching the Beatles put together Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and decided they wanted a piece of whatever was happening. The result was Their Satanic Majesty's Request, their 8th studio album, released in December 1967. A full-on psychedelic effort complete with a 3D cover photograph. Keith Richards later described the album as a load of crap, and the critical consensus has never fully disagreed with him. The album's opening track, Sing This All Together, is one of the more genuinely disorienting things in the Stones' catalog. It begins with a deceptively simple, almost childlike melody, and then, over its 4 minutes, gradually dissolves into a kind of collective noise that sounds less like a rock song and more like a room full of people who have been awake for 4 days, deciding, jointly, that rules don't apply anymore. Instruments surface and disappear. Voices overlap. There's a chaotic middle section that the band apparently improvised on the spot. The whole thing has the quality of a party that started somewhere sensible and ended up somewhere nobody planned to go. The Stones didn't perform it live. They didn't put it on a greatest hits collection. But it exists as a document of a band willing to try anything, even things that didn't work. And that willingness is part of what made them. Number 14. 2000 Man. Also from their Satanic Majesty's Request, 2000 Man is a considerably more coherent piece of psychedelia than anything else on that album, which is part of why it tends to get overlooked. It doesn't sound deranged enough to be memorable for its strangeness, and it isn't well known enough to be remembered as a classic. It occupies the in-between. Jagger and Richards wrote it as a kind of science fiction character study. A man living in the distant future, alienated from his wife and his children, disconnected from his own emotions, communicating through machines. For 1967, the content was unusually specific in its pessimism about technology and human connection. It wasn't the summer of love, it was a quiet nightmare about what came after. The song got a significant second life in 1977 when Kiss included a cover of it on their album Rock and Roll Over, with Ace Frehley singing lead. The Kiss version introduced 2000 Man to an entirely new audience that had never heard the original. And for many rock fans of the late 1970s, the Kiss version was the only version they knew for years. Number 13. Something Happened to Me Yesterday.
Something happened to me yesterday.
Between the Buttons, 1967, is one of the less loved Stones albums of the 1960s, squeezed between the pop directness of Aftermath and the psychedelic overreach of Satanic Majesties. But it contains some genuinely strange moments, and none stranger than the album's closing track, Something Happened to Me Yesterday.
He don't know just where it's gone. He don't.
The song is built around a deliberately vague title that the band apparently refused to clarify. In interviews of the era, Jagger and Richards would coyly suggest that the something that happened was a drug experience, specifically LSD, but they were never explicit about it, which was partly a legal precaution and partly theatrical. The music itself sounds like a Salvation Army band that has wandered into the wrong decade. There are trombones. There's a Dixieland feel that seems almost deliberately ridiculous. Jagger and Richards trade spoken word segments toward the end. The song was banned by the BBC on suspicion of being about drug use. As was often the case with BBC bands of that era, the restriction made the song more interesting to people who might otherwise have ignored it entirely.
Something happened to me yesterday.
Number 12. I Am Waiting.
I am waiting. I am waiting.
Aftermath, 1966, is the album that most Stones historians point to as the moment the band became genuinely original, rather than a very good cover band. It was the first album made entirely of Jagger Richards' original compositions, and it showed how far they had come from the Rolling Stones of 1963.
Waiting for someone to come out of somewhere.
I Am Waiting sits in the middle of the album and doesn't make a lot of noise about being there. It's a quiet, somewhat mournful song with an acoustic guitar foundation, and what sounds like a dulcimer being played by Brian Jones, though accounts differ on the exact instrumentation. The arrangement is spare, the lyric is genuinely pensive, and the mood is one that didn't appear much elsewhere in their output at the time. What makes it interesting beyond the song itself is where it sits in the story. Brian Jones was, at this point, still the most adventurous musician in the band, reaching for instruments nobody else thought to use, building textures that nobody else was building. I Am Waiting is a small demonstration of what Jones could do when the song gave him space.
I am waiting. I am waiting.
Number 11. We Love You. Released in the summer of 1967, We Love You was the Rolling Stones' response to the criminal prosecutions that had hit the band earlier that year. Jagger and Richards had been arrested, tried, and briefly jailed on drugs charges in June 1967, a prosecution that was widely viewed as a tabloid-driven moral panic and which generated considerable public sympathy for the band. We Love You was their thank you to that public, and their act of defiance toward the establishment that had tried to put them away. The opening of the record featured the sound of a heavy door slamming, keys turning in a lock, and footsteps echoing on stone floors. It was a deliberate, theatrical reference to the imprisonment they had just survived. John Lennon and Paul McCartney sang backing vocals on the track, making it one of the more striking Beatles-Stones crossover moments of the era. The two bands ran in genuinely overlapping creative circles during 1967, not just socially, but musically. And this was one of the visible results. Nicky Hopkins played piano. The sound design includes a repeated musical motif that seems to deliberately evoke a courtroom. There are passages that sound like scales of justice being invoked. The whole thing has an almost ceremonial quality. Not exactly a rock song, not exactly a protest song, not exactly a love song, but something in between that fit the specific strange moment of that summer better than anything more conventional would have. Number 10. Child of the Moon. In May 1968, Fleetwood Mac released Jumpin' Jack Flash as a single, the definitive announcement that the psychedelic experiment was over, and the Stones were heading somewhere harder and more direct. Most people who bought the single flipped it over, heard the B-side, played Jumpin' Jack Flash again, and forgot what was on the back. What was on the back was Child of the Moon, one of the last pieces of full psychedelic mode the Stones ever attempted. It was recorded at London's Olympic Studios in March 1968 at the very start of the Beggars Banquet sessions, with producer Jimmy Miller, and it sounds like it belongs to a different world than everything around it. Brian Jones is on saxophone, Nicky Hopkins plays piano. The track opens with a garbled, half-heard mutter, which is reportedly producer Jimmy Miller's voice, before settling into a hazy, moonlit atmosphere that doesn't quite resolve into anything. The song only ever appeared on a handful of compilation albums over the following decades, and never found a natural home in the catalog. It is genuinely one of the least-known tracks in their discography, despite having been the B-side of one of their most iconic singles. Number 9. Jigsaw Puzzle.
Just trying to do my jigsaw puzzle.
Beggars Banquet, 1968, is mostly remembered for Street Fighting Man and Sympathy for the Devil, the two songs that defined the Stones as the dark counterpart to the Beatles' peace and love mythology. But the album contains considerably more than those two landmarks, and Jigsaw Puzzle is among the most overlooked things on it.
Oh, the gangster
At 6 minutes, it was one of the longest songs the Stones had recorded at that point. Jagger uses the structure of the song as a frame for a series of character sketches: a tramp under a bridge, a bishop in his chair, a rock band on a tour bus, a gangster in his Cadillac, a singer losing his voice, all of them existing in a world slightly out of joint, all of them pieces of a puzzle that doesn't quite fit together. The music underneath is loose and country-inflected, with Richards playing slide guitar and the whole arrangement feeling almost deliberately casual, as if the band stumbled into it rather than constructed it. The song gets very little airplay and rarely appears on any best of list, partly because it doesn't fit neatly into any category, and partly because it's too long and strange for radio formats. But among dedicated Stones listeners, it tends to generate real affection, the kind a song earns by being genuinely unusual in a catalog full of songs that know exactly what they are. It feels, for its 6 minutes, like the Stones making music for themselves, rather than for anyone else.
Just trying to do my jigsaw puzzle.
Number 8. Gumper.
The sun sees her dried.
Back to their Satanic Majesty's request for one more entry. This one even further out than Sing This All Together. Gumper is a 5-minute track that is generally described, generously, as the Stones' attempt at Indian-influenced drone music. Brian Jones was the band member most seriously engaged with non-Western musical forms at this point. He had worked with Moroccan musicians and had a genuine interest in the tonal possibilities of unusual instruments.
Birds hover high.
The result is something that sits somewhere between a raga and a lullaby, and a sound experiment. There is a sitar. There is a flute. Mick Jagger's vocal delivery is deliberately measured and hypnotic. The track doesn't build toward anything in the conventional sense. It simply exists as an atmosphere, a sustained mood that runs for its duration and then ends. It is perhaps the single most committed piece of musical adventurousness on an album that was otherwise committed to being adventurous, mostly in the sense of being excessive. Whether that adventurousness succeeded is genuinely a matter of taste. But Gumper was Brian Jones at his most intent on expanding what the band could be. And that makes it worth hearing at least once.
The sun sees her dried.
Number 7. Dancing with Mr. D. Goat's Head Soup, 1973, is one of the Stones albums that tends to get overshadowed by everything on either side of it: Exile on Main Street before it, and It's Only Rock and Roll after. And within that already underappreciated album, the opening track tends to get lost. Dancing with Mr. D opens the album with a genuinely creepy invocation of death as a literal figure, dark and threatening, rendered in one of the most gothic arrangements the Stones ever committed to tape. The track was written by Jagger and Richards and recorded in Jamaica, where the band had decamped with considerable quantities of cocaine and a general mood of post-exile uncertainty about what came next. The Jamaica sessions were expensive and chaotic and produced an album that, at the time, felt uneven. But Dancing with Mr. D has held up better than most of what surrounds it. The atmosphere is genuinely unsettling, in a way that rock music rarely achieves without trying too hard. Number 6. Cherry, Oh Baby. The Rolling Stones have never been given enough credit for their reggae records. By the mid-1970s, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards had become genuinely enthusiastic students of the Jamaican sound, and the results occasionally turned up on albums in ways that surprised listeners who weren't paying close attention. Cherry Oh Baby appears on Black and Blue, 1976, and is a cover of a 1971 song originally recorded by Jamaican artist Eric Donaldson, who won the Festival Song Contest in Jamaica with the original. The Stones version is warmly played and deeply felt. It doesn't sound like a novelty or a genre experiment. It sounds like a band that genuinely loved this music and wanted to play it, which, by all accounts, they did. The playing is relaxed and confident rather than reverential and careful, which is exactly the difference between appropriation and influence. Richards has spoken in several interviews about keeping Jamaican records with him in the south of France, when the band was in tax exile and working on the Exile on Main Street material. The reggae scene of the early 1970s, Toots and the Maytals, Burning Spear, Dennis Brown, was part of the soundtrack of those years for the band. That listening fed directly into the reggae-influenced tracks that showed up in the mid-1970s, of which Cherry O Baby is the clearest and most committed example. Number 5. Fingerprint File. It's Only Rock and Roll, 1974, closes with a 6.5-minute funk workout that sounds almost nothing like the Rolling Stones and almost everything like Sly Stone. Fingerprint File is built around a paranoid, funky groove. Jagger plays rhythm guitar himself on the track and features Jagger singing from the perspective of a man convinced he is being surveilled by intelligence agencies, tracked and filed and watched everywhere he goes. The timing was not accidental. 1974 was 2 years after Watergate, 1 year after the Senate hearings that had exposed the full scope of government surveillance programs against American citizens and activists. Jagger was following the news closely. The song's paranoia had a specific context, and the audience that heard it in 1974 understood exactly what it was talking about. The band have not played Fingerprint File live since 1975. It has never found its way onto a compilation or greatest hits package. It remains one of the deepest, strangest cuts in the catalog, and easily one of the funkiest things they ever made. Number 4. Faraway Eyes. On Some Girls, 1978. The album that the Stones made in direct response to disco and punk and the accusation that they had become irrelevant, sits Faraway Eyes, a country song delivered by Jagger in the most exaggerated Southern American accent in the history of British rock music. The song is a parody, sort of. Jagger sings in a drawl that no one from England has any business deploying, in the character of a man driving through California, listening to country radio, and falling briefly in love with a girl at a stoplight outside a Church of God. The references are American and specific and affectionate, in a way that makes it difficult to tell where the parody ends and the genuine appreciation begins. Richards has said that the song came from the band's experience touring America endlessly for over a decade, absorbing the country through its music, its truck stops, its radio stations, its geography. Faraway Eyes is the most committed piece of that absorption, a Stones song that could genuinely be mistaken, for a moment, for something that came from Nashville. Number 3. Too Much Blood. Too Much Blood appears on Undercover, 1983, and it is, by a significant margin, the most disturbing song the Rolling Stones ever recorded. The track is built over a funk groove borrowed directly from early 1980s New York dance music. The bass is deep, the drums are electronic. The whole thing sounds like something playing in a downtown Manhattan club at 2 a.m. And then Jagger starts talking about a murder case. The song was inspired by the 1981 case of Issei Sagawa, a Japanese student studying in Paris who murdered a Dutch classmate, Renee Hartevelt, and then consumed part of her body. Sagawa was found incompetent to stand trial in France and was returned to Japan, where he was never formally prosecuted and eventually became a minor celebrity, writing books and appearing in magazines. The case was widely covered in Europe and America at the time. Jagger narrates the events over the funk groove with a disturbing calm that makes the content feel even more unsettling than it would if the song were conventionally dark. He names the Texas Chainsaw Massacre by name. The contrast between the tone of the music and the subject matter is the point, and it is genuinely uncomfortable. Number 2. Silver Train. Goat's Head Soup, 1973, appears twice on this list, which is a testament to how consistently undervalued that album has been over the years. Silver Train is a straight-ahead boogie in the tradition of the best Chuck Berry-influenced rock and roll the Stones ever made, driving, loose, and full of forward motion. What makes it unusual is how little it sounds like the Stones of 1973. By that point, the band had accumulated so many influences – blues, country, funk, reggae, soul – that their straight rock and roll had developed a specific texture that set it apart from what they had been doing in 1964. Silver Train sounds like a band who never forgot where they came from, running it back with 10 years of experience behind them. It was also released as a single, reaching the charts without making much noise, and was quickly forgotten in the wake of everything else the Stones were doing that year. Bobby Keys played saxophone on the track. He was one of the unofficial extended members of the Rolling Stones universe through the early and mid-1970s, and his work on both Exile on Main Street and Goat's Head Soup is part of what gives those records their warm, lived-in texture. Silver Train deserves better than it gets, and so does the album that surrounds it. Number 1. Cocksucker Blues. In 1970, the Rolling Stones were in the process of leaving Decca Records, a label they had grown to despise over the course of their contract for what they considered a pattern of financial exploitation and creative interference. Their final obligation to Decca was to deliver one more single. Jagger wrote and recorded Cocksucker Blues as a deliberate act of commercial sabotage, an explicit, graphic song that he knew Decca would never be able to release. The lyric describes the narrator, newly arrived in London, and asking men in Piccadilly Circus for sexual favors in exchange for money. It is not subtle. It was not intended to be subtle. It was intended to be unreleasable. It worked. Decca declined to release it. The Stones fulfilled their contractual obligation, and the song leaked into bootleg circulation, where it has lived ever since, one of the most famous unreleased recordings in rock history, known by name to virtually every serious Stones fan and heard by far fewer. The title also became attached to Robert Frank's documentary film of the band's 1972 Exile on Main Street tour, a film so raw, so unfiltered, and so unflattering in its documentation of the band's behavior on the road that the Stones blocked its commercial release immediately after seeing it. Frank was allowed to screen it publicly only 4 times per year under a court injunction. Both the song and the film became legendary, partly because they existed in a space just outside the official record, proof that even with 60 years of documented history, there are still corners of the Rolling Stones story that were never meant to be part of the catalog. The song remains in bootleg circulation only, which is exactly where Jagger intended it to stay in 1970. That intention has since become part of its mythology. If any of these tracks sent you straight to YouTube, hit the like button and subscribe. There are more deep dives like this one coming.